I used to think the scent of burning metal was just the way morning smelled. Arlov was like that. The sky always carried soot. Our streets were paved in dust and diesel, and nothing ever felt clean, not even your thoughts. I worked the line at Forge Bay 12, melting down old war scrap, reshaping it into something we could sell. Armor plating, train wheels, sometimes scaffolding rods for collapsed buildings in the north. Every week, another batch of rusted artillery came in, tagged with chalk like livestock. And every time, I'd wonder if these scraps had taken lives. Sometimes the shapes were too familiar. A shell casing still caked with red. A dented helmet, visor shattered. We weren't supposed to ask questions. I was 19. I lived in Block 17C with my sister Anya and our grandfather, Mikhail. My parents died when I was 11, disease, not war. The sickness took a third of our district. No headlines, no mourning. Just mass cremation behind the silos. Mikhail never liked to talk about it, but sometimes when he got drunk, he'd tell me stories. About the last war. About how we once had a flag we could believe in. But Mikhail didn't believe in much anymore. He wore a hollow stare even in sleep, as if something in him never came back from the trenches. I suppose I carried that same seed in me. Quiet, buried, waiting to bloom. Anya was different. She was light. Bright and fast-talking, clever beyond her years. 16 and already building hacked transmitters out of junkyard consoles. She called it her pirate radio. Every night, she'd play outlaw music across the rooftops, songs banned by the regime. You could hear them crackling in the static if you tuned the right dial. Sometimes poetry, too. And once, just once, she broadcast our parents' names. As if naming them out loud made them real again. I remember that night because I was angry. Told her she was being reckless. Told her she'd bring soldiers to our door. She didn't even flinch. They already know who we are, she said. They just haven't decided we matter yet. I hated how right she was. The city buzzed with rumors then, troop movements in the east, supply shortages, draft lists circulating. The Federation blamed the Western Alliance for the attacks in the border cities. The Alliance said we fired first. The only thing anyone agreed on was that something was coming. And then it did. It was a Thursday. I was late for shift. The factory gates were still a blur behind me when the sirens wailed. Not the air raid ones, the low tone, the real ones. The kind that meant run. I remember looking up just in time to see the first shape pierce the clouds. Like a silver fang splitting the sky. No warning. No countdown. Just a flash, brighter than anything I'd ever seen, and then a wall of heat that slapped the breath from my lungs. I don't remember falling. Just waking up, covered in ash. Half the sky had turned orange. Forge Bay 12 was gone. Flattened. Crumpled cranes like dead insects. People screaming. Somewhere, fire was still raining down. And Block 17C? I ran. I ran until my legs bled, until my breath burned. By the time I reached it, the street had caved in. Our building was split down the middle like a cracked tooth. Rubble. Smoke. The fire teams were dragging bodies out like trash bags. I found Mikhail. He was unconscious, barely alive. Pulled from the wreckage with half his ribcage broken. But Anya. They said she was in the stairwell when it collapsed. That she died instantly. No pain. That's what they said. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, the dust coating my lips like rust, and I watched them carry her body away in a black sack marked civilian, code black. Something inside me died before she did. The part that still believed we were safe as long as we stayed out of sight. As long as we were silent. The next day, the conscription officers came. They handed me a gun and a contract. Said we were at war now. Said I should be proud. I signed without blinking. The train that took us to Camp Vaskov had no windows. Just riveted steel and the constant whine of brakes that never stopped squealing. I remember the rattling more than anything. That sound nested in my spine for weeks after, as if the train had carved its rhythm into my bones. They packed us in like cattle. Boys and girls barely out of school, dockhands with grease under their nails, farmers with calluses thick as boot soles. No one spoke. Some cried when they thought no one was watching. Others stared straight ahead, jaws clenched, fists white. I was somewhere in between, burning behind the eyes, but silent. We arrived under floodlights and barking. Camp Vaskov was a concrete scar in the mountains, snow-drizzled and ugly. The moment the doors opened, the cold hit us like a slap. Lines formed. Names were called. Numbers assigned. I became Private 417D. They shaved our heads. Sprayed us down with antifungal mist that stung the skin raw. Issued uniforms that didn't fit and boots with soles so thin you could feel every pebble through them. Then came the indoctrination, a week of speeches, drills, and ideology pounded into our skulls like nails. We were told the enemy was godless. That they burned villages. That they kidnapped children. That they bombed their own and blamed us. That they used chemical weapons on civilians. That they would do the same to us if we hesitated. But they never showed us faces. Never showed us who they were. Instead, they gave us simulators. Plastic rifles that buzzed with recoil, VR goggles that played endless loops of battlefields rendered in gritty gray. You couldn't feel the heat or the blood, but you could hear it. Screams. Explosions. The gurgle of a throat closing. After 2 weeks, they sent us to the live range. Real bullets. Real targets, shapes painted red, moving on rails. Then came the tests. Obstacle courses through mud and gunfire simulations. Sleep deprivation. Forced marches in blackout conditions. They were trying to break us. Most of us bent. A few snapped. One kid from the lower Varel district slit his wrists with a chipped spoon. They found him in the latrine, blood mixed with sewage. Nobody said his name. They just scrubbed the floor and filled his bunk the next day. There were moments when I looked around and thought, this is it. I've stepped out of the world and into some machine built to grind me down. But then I'd hear Anya's laugh in the back of my head. Her defiance. Her radio static. That voice she used when she dared the world to look at her. And I'd remember what they took from me. That's what kept me upright. One night, I got a letter. Stamped, provisional correspondence. It was from Mikhail. Someone had written it for him, the letters crooked, uneven. He said he was alive, in a recovery center outside Arlov. Said his ribs would heal but that, the real wound is where she used to sit when she sang. I read that line 5 times. It still haunts me. A week later, I got reassigned. They told me I'd passed the intellectual filters and had a head for recon. That I was being moved to special operations prep. Nobody said what that meant exactly. Just that the missions would be shorter, dirtier, and quieter. That I'd see things most soldiers don't come back from. And then I met her. Sarah Wynne. She walked into the barracks like she didn't care who stared. Tall, lean, eyes like fractured glass. She wore the black crest of Ghost Coil, silver wire twisted into a snake, on her collar. You Kale? She asked. I nodded. You look like someone with a grudge, she said. Good. You're gonna need it. No salute. No introduction. Just those words, and then she was gone. I didn't know it then, but that moment marked the end of my training. The last time I'd march in formation or shout slogans I didn't believe. The next chapter would begin in fire, wires, and silence. They flew us out in a black VTOL that didn't carry insignias. It was just me, Sarah, and 2 others, ghosts in borrowed uniforms. The hold smelled of oil and ozone. I didn't know their names yet, just code names barked over comms: Torch, Marker, and Blue. Mine was Ash. I guess someone had a sense of humor. We didn't speak during the flight. Just the occasional click over headsets, acknowledgements without words. It wasn't until we touched down at Forward Echo 6, a staging outpost in a ruined mining valley, that I realized what I'd signed up for. We weren't infantry. We weren't even officially military anymore. The Ghost Coil operated behind fronts, in zero visibility zones, where satellites went blind and no one asked questions. If you were captured, you were disavowed. If you were killed, you were buried in silence. They gave us new gear. Suppressed rifles, field drones, thermal mesh cloaks. Each of us was issued a pill, a kill switch. Cyanide, modified to bypass the tongue and melt straight into your blood if bitten. One of the medics called it the soft goodbye. We were told to memorize every corridor of the underground complex beneath Echo 6. 2 days of tight drills, blindfolded runs, gear checks, night op simulations. And then the first real mission, Operation Silencer. A listening station 2 kilometers east of Calebridge had gone dark. Not enemy territory, our territory. Too quiet for too long. Command suspected either infiltration or deliberate sabotage. We were to infiltrate under nightfall, recover the black box, and, if compromised, detonate the structure. No retrieval orders. No rescue. They dropped us in by glider, low and quiet. The snow was so thick it muffled our boots. Sarah led point. I watched her silhouette disappear ahead, then flicker again in my goggles, tagged in green. Her movements were precise, like she'd rehearsed the terrain in a dream. Behind us, Torch and Marker moved like shadows. No sound. No radio chatter. We breached the station at 0300. Inside was wrong. No signs of a fight. No bullet holes. No blood. Just empty bunks, computers still humming, coffee half sipped. The scent of ozone hung in the air, sharp, unnatural. Marker sniffed twice and muttered, EMP. Torch found the comms room. Black box was missing. I found something else. In the server bank, someone had scrawled a message in red grease pencil across the wall. We were watching the wrong skies. No explanation. Just that line. Blue's voice came through our earpieces, flat and clipped. Movement outside. One contact. Not ours. Sarah's hand went up. All stop. We crouched in the dark, listening. Snow crunch. Soft. Deliberate. Then a flash, white hot, and the whole building shuddered. EMP. But not a pulse. A bomb. The lights died. My goggles went blind. In the momentary darkness, I heard screaming, not human. An electronic shriek, like feedback from a dying machine. And then silence again. When my vision came back, the front half of the station was gone. Just gone. A crater smoldering in the snow. Marker was missing. Torch lay face down, unmoving. Sarah grabbed my arm and yanked me back into the stairwell. Her breath hissed against my cheek. Extraction. Now. We didn't ask questions. We left a beacon in the rubble and hiked 5 clicks through a frozen ravine to a secondary pickup. Blue met us there. Said nothing. Just stared at the stars like he expected them to fall. When we returned to Echo 6, there were new orders already waiting. The brass was rattled. Whatever happened at Calebridge wasn't sabotage, it was a test, and someone in our chain had known it was coming. They just didn't warn us. Or they did, and someone buried the report. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought of Anya. Of the way the stairwell must have looked just before it gave way. Of the crater we left behind. Of the words on that wall. We were watching the wrong skies. And I wondered. Had I signed up to fight an enemy I could see, or something far worse?